Yes, welcome. This is A RAP CRITIC. I'm your boy Malik16, founder, Plates and Greats, the Rap Ruler, and this show you're watching. And no, I'm not blue and I'm not from LA, so I wore pink because I'm from Harlem. And today I'm joined by a very, very special guest, my homie for real. Not only a homie, but an expert in the field. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. This is an Uptown Connection here.
What's up? This is Starr Rocque, and I am a writer, entertainment journalist, content creator who has been covering pop culture, entertainment, and music for a long time. It's been a very long time. And so I'm here today to chat with the homie Malik, who I view as a hip-hop historian. So this is an honor to even be here.
That means a lot coming from you. It's one thing to like self-proclaim it, but you know, when the greats tell you that that's what you do, or the people
I mean, for you to call me a great, I still don't even feel like
I mean, we'll get into it. If any of you are so inclined, y'all really need to Google this young lady. You know, you're gonna find GangStarrGirl.
Oh gosh.
Is what you're gonna find maybe the most pieces about, but that blog was a part of the whole era of the blog takeover in hip hop. We're going to talk about it a little bit more as we go over this album. And of course, the album that we are gathered here today to talk about is the classic Below the Heavens by the duo Blu Exile. The reason why Starrine is here is because Starrine is single-handedly the person who informed me about this album back in the day. And, you know, there's a story to that too, but we'll go through it. If you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel and visit the Rap Ruler, where you can go and officially cast your rankings and your votes. You can get some merch, join, you know, and be a part of the global hip hop community so we can stop relying on some of this outdated source material stating what's classics and have the final word and let the decision come from you, the general public, right? There's a little background on this album. It was released in July of 2007. It was released independently and went on to live in history, as we'll discuss. So this is category 1, where we go over the album, the product itself. And the first dimension we talk about when we get into category 1 is dimension 1, the quality of the production. So who produced on this, Starr?
It was Exile. It's kind of like, and it's weird to even say this, but like we don't really get so much of like the rapper producer duos anymore. And even back then, I feel like that was kind of starting to fade out a little bit. And so they were kind of bringing that, like what we used to get like with like a Pete Rock and CL Smooth, or like a like a Rakim and Eric B kind of thing. Not necessarily in sound, but just the concept of like the producer rapper getting together. So Exile did the production.
Right, and I'm trying to remember if we've heard Exile's name in the sphere prior, but more than likely you would not if you weren't on the underground scene in California, because apparently Exile has been around since like '95 with the group Eminon. And Eminon is a group that was comprised of him and Aloe Black, who most of you might know as like a pop singer now, but
which
you know,
is crazy.
This is in the vein of like the LA, the Los Angeles underground rap scene has always been unique. It's been very distinct from the New York underground rap scene and underground rap scenes. I don't even know if the South has an underground rap scene, but
yeah, right.
Historically, LA Underground's always been self-contained, where the mythos of selfish New York reigns true, because very rarely would you hear underground music from other regions spill over to New York, but every region got the underground New York stuff. And so here, you know, LA had the Freestyle Fellowship, they had their like Jurassic 5, and then of course the Bay underground scene spilling over with the whole Hyro camp, the Black Alicious, and so with that there's a sound, and I feel like LA Underground always used softer instrumentation. You know, New York was all about boom bap
Yeah,
for their
okay.
underground stuff. So what Exile's doing, Exile's pulling from all of those elements, and I'm so glad you used the word influence, because I think the influence is glaring on this album. It's like, oh, we are gonna be the new Pete Rock and CO Smooth. This is coming right out of the prime of Ninth Wonder and Dilla just passing away. And so you're gonna hear a lot of that influence throughout, even though Exile's been in the game for a long time. The way they approached this project sounded like a kid in a candy shop. It you know, honestly, it sounded like a white guy just discovered soul music. It's like, oh, I got all these soul records. No one's doing anything with it, right? Because there's nothing but samples here, and samples from big timers. You're getting Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. You're getting James Brown. You're getting the OJs being sampled. And then the Dells get sampled twice on here. And there's only about 3 tracks on here that don't have vocal samples in it. You know what I mean? So when you get them, they're a nice break, but every song relies heavily, and it's almost built around the sample.
Right. That makes sense.
And there was a deliberate effort here, of course, to sample songs that use the word blue. The scratches, Exile showing off his DJ skills, and they try to do these like musical segues in between, a la Pete Rock. But yeah, I mean, there's a range.
It felt like it's like an album for the purists, I guess. Like, the true hip hop snobs.
But you know, like you said, there's something to be said about an album helmed all by one producer. That means they're able to really, you know, dictate how they want the soundscape to be. And I think Exile, being the professional that he was and the vet in the game at that point, he knew a direction he wanted to go. So the word is that sometimes Blue would bring samples. For instance, the final song, I Am Blue, that's apparently the first song that they did together. Blue came to Exile with the Sesame Street sample from Grover, singing I Am Blue. And it makes sense. We don't know whose idea it was to do so many Blue samples, but it sounds like it was a marriage of both, a meeting of both minds. So yeah, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. So Starr, what you giving this for quality of production?
I'll give it a 4. I'll give it a 4 because the production is cohesive. I think the samples were sourced, meaning they put thought into the samples that they wanted, like going back to you saying how them being intentional about the use of the word blue. The other thing is, this album came out at a time where soul was on its way out. Like, people weren't really doing the soul samples like that anymore. And I think they were kind of like trying to keep that element alive.
That's perfect that you mentioned that, because that takes us to dimension 2, the cohesiveness. It's one thing to have this one producer at the head of this and all this soul floating around, but how well does it go together is the question.
I think it goes together well. I think it sounds like you can hear the vision to me, like if that makes sense. Like, I think that was what they were married to, and they stuck with it. You can hear that, like whatever discussions were had is what they wanted it to feel like.
Can we just point out that it's a bar, that was just a whole bar that you dropped, Ree?
Oh, okay.
You said, it sounds like you could hear the vision. Psh, drop the mic. Yeah, sequencing is always what this dimension brings up. What was the execution? Who was doing the executive producing? Who had the vision to put what song after what song, right? And so I mentioned how there's these attempts at these musical segues or breaks. There's a lot of skits and segues in between songs, and the more I'm doing these albums with skits, I really appreciate those who are mindful enough to put that stuff at the end of a song. So if you don't want to hear it, you can skip it. Right. Some people put it at the beginning. It's like, oh man, I just want to get to the music, right? And so sometimes it's pulled off better than others. There's some filler skits. So at the end of a song like is it First Things First or Good Life, where there's this like crazy ripping sound, it's just distorted, like a motorcycle taking off, and then the sample comes back, and then Blu's joking and saying he doesn't like Exile, he just likes his beats. Like that segue is not as smooth, but you get a segue like what comes right after Blue Collar Worker going into Dancing in the Rain, and that sample comes in perfect. Then it goes into the real beat sample. So you get moments like that. I don't think they're all as tight in gluing the album together. Sometimes you get albums where those interludes and segues blend perfectly and get you ready for the next song.
And the skits are memorable, and there's a lot of, like, the skits here aren't so memorable, but like, you know, there are certain skits that you could probably just start talking about the skit and everybody knows where album is from, what song. I didn't get that from here.
Right. Does it mess up the cohesiveness? I don't know. That's something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats for y'all, you know, because there's so much of a reliance on vocal samples, soul samples, and as we pointed out, soul samples that are all from the same era, with the exception of the Tony Mottola sample for Dancing in the Rain. Most of them stay sampled from the same genre, whereas this old Motown era soul, 60s soul, you can't go wrong picking from that stock. And it also has the effect of making you feel like there's a similarity there. It's not like I picked from classical, then I picked from rock. I think there might be one rock sample, like from Iron Maiden or something, but for the most part, it's all from the same stock, so that gives it a bunched feel, like a family feel. What you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5 for cohesiveness?
Cohesiveness, yeah, I would give it a 4, just because I think it again, like, it took a lot of thought to go for production, mostly from the same era, similar sound, because I think during this time too, like when this album came out, it was where we were in hip hop was like a mix of like the soul samples were still around and still kind of like popping off, but it was at a point where it had already been done, right? Like we had the Just Blazer, we had the Kanye era, and then it started to seem like anybody who was using a soul sample after that was kind of just like, I'm gonna use a soul sample, and just found any old song and would just put out a song that sounded like that. So with this, again, the thought process, I give it a 4 because I feel like the intention is really there, but it kind of starts to bleed together. Like when you're listening to it, it doesn't feel like there's certain albums that when I listen to it, or like if you ask me what are some classic albums, and I'll drop the albums from a personal perspective, it's usually an album that I feel like I can listen to from front to back on a road trip without skipping anything, because I just love the whole body of work and it doesn't get boring to me. Whereas Below the Heavens, it kind of starts to bleed together. It does. Like, it just gets really monotonous after a while.
Oh, wow. I didn't see that coming.
The skits, I wasn't so much a fan of. And I actually do like skits on albums. I think for any album, though, there's a such thing as overdoing it. Like, there's some people that do skits really well, Ghostface, Redman, but this is not that. Like, so I think I'll give it a 4. Like, I think the cohesiveness definitely could have been better. Like some of the skits and the extra stuff could have been dropped.
Gotcha. You mentioned that 2007 being such a unique year. This is that post-Dilla year. So I think there was a phantom push within the industry for producers to kind of like pay homage to Dilla. And you mentioned the soul sample. It was absolutely abused after Jay-Z released the Blueprint, right? So for those 2 years following, everyone was using probably every soul sample that's ever existed, and then people were like, we're off that, and then things started getting real futuristic and experimental again. And it's ironic that Jay-Z came back this year and was like, I'm gonna bring that sound back one more time,
right?
With his American Gangster album. So this album and that were probably the two most major soul sample albums of that year on two different ends of the spectrum. So yeah, something to consider. That takes us to dimension 3, the overall intentional mood and tone of the album. Now, the reason the word intentional is there is because the mood and tone outside of what's intentional is always subjective, right? What you get from the album is based off your personal experience, but you can always tell, if you're attuned to it, what the artist or what the performer intended for the album based on the songs they picked and what they did. And so I'll speak to both, because I think there is an intentional tone that's trying to be set here. And with Blue, you'll hear it in the raps. It's gonna be this theme of, I'm just an everyday LA guy trying to make it in this hip hop game, and I'm not with the pretentiousness. And also, I'm trying to save hip hop and bring real hip hop. There's almost a drive to like disprove the plasticness that you hear people complain of LA with him. He's like, yeah, I'm around all of that, but I'm not with that.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the blue collar everyday guy rap.
That's the intentional mood, and maybe on Exile's end, it is to, you know, showcase the skill set, what can be done with these soul samples, and how dope hip hop can be made from an unexpected place. The unintentional mood and tone, though, I feel very much that it has this effect of feeling like rehash raucous. This sounds so much like a raucous era album that it same way I said it, there's a sound, there's a feeling that it feels like Exile just discovered soul samples, which is why he went ham with them. I feel like Blue just discovered classic hip hop. Like somebody just gave him all the classics, and he was like,
I'm gonna be like. In some ways, he did. Like, I know you looked up his backstory about how like he was raised in a very religious household at first, and then like as an older teenager, he went to live with his first he was raised by his mom, and then her future husband and his stepfather, and then he went to live with his dad, and so it kind of was in a way like he was like early 2007, so like early to mid 20s when that came out. So technically, you could say he was still just discovering.
That makes sense stuff. Because he does, like in the middle of the love song, I think on Greatest Love, he's talking about a woman and being in a relationship, but he's like, yeah, it's like the first time hearing Time's Up. I'm like, Time's Up by OC? And then he's like, yeah, like the first time I'm hearing Calm Bus. I'm like, oh, bro, you can't talk about a woman without talking about your love of hip hop. You one of those. And we might be biased just because you and I lived through that era where there was just such an extreme push for, I represent the real rap and real hip hop.
Remember, you know? I dated a rapper like that.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a reminiscent quality, but it gets overplayed. There's a difference between having like homage elements. A few episodes ago, you know, I reviewed Big Crit's double album, Forever's a Mighty Long Time. And we talked about how much that album is steeped in homage. Like, he's like, look, I grew up on UGK and Goody Mob and Outkast. I'm going to have Organized Noise and UGK on my album. And he still is able to capture the essence of, I'm a fan, but I also am on the same tier as them. I'm going to do some of the stuff they do, but I'm still going to do some of my newer stuff. Something about this album feels like all the elements of stuff we've heard before. He captures a De La spirit where, you know, in the De La episode I talked about, as great as De La is, after that first album, they just seem like the regular Joe's hip hop. No flash, no flair. And I think Blue wanted to like relegate himself to that spot. He spent so much of this album talking about what he's not, that it almost plays out like an insecurity album. Like, you get the boastful moments, but when he's talking to women, and all his songs talking to women, he's always talking about what he doesn't have. I ain't got a car, you know, I ain't a baller. When he's doing his battle raps, he's always talking about how he's not a gangster and not a thug. And there's always something to rappers when they spend so much time telling you what they're not, where the insecurity starts to bubble. And so I feel like that's part of the unintentional. I don't know I don't think they realize that that's the feeling that could be generated. Because again, it sounds like a very earnest attempt at trying to recapture and create something new at the same time.
It was.
I'm trying not to be the jaded old head, because I mean, if someone told me this was a Shabam Sadiq album, I'd be like, oh, okay. And there's nothing that makes it feel like it couldn't have been released in 1997 to me.
Yeah.
Which is great if that's what they were going for, because again, I think some of that deliberate, intentional move was to recapture that feeling. They mentioned being the new Pete Rock and CL Smooth. They mentioned, the people that they pay homage and the era that they pay homage to. I also want to speak to, what's popularly considered the theme of the album is this flirting with the existentialism. Like, what am I here for? Is there heaven or hell? What am I doing? And it sounds very, people are into like mindfulness and the power of now. It sounds very today, live for today.
Yeah.
And then reflect on the past. Not a lot of future talk. Like he says stuff like regular rap stuff like, we're gonna go platinum, we're gonna blow. But for the most part, he's concerned with what's going on right now in his immediate life. And then he does a lot of reminiscing for someone so young. He mentions on a song, In Remembrance of Me, which is also a really crazy title, right? It's like Tombstone talk, right? But to hear him try to sound...
some trauma rap before that was cool, like rapping about traumas and things.
To hear him try to sound deep and reflect on his life when his life just means high school. It's like, okay, Blue. Because he's like, yeah, at 13, I was like, okay, bro, that was only like 6 years ago. But that might be something else that you could argue was executed well, because there's enough songs where he starts talking about the uncertainty of life, the abruptness of life changes and stuff. So the verse on Good Life where he's talking about having a kid, the hypothetical child, and how he's gonna provide, and then of course songs like In Remembrance of Me, Cold Hearted, and the title track. So I mean, that is something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. The intentional mood and tone, and just the overall mood and tone. What are you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5? How well did they execute their intentional mood and tone?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say, shoot, they executed it. I think they got the point across. And I'm saying this too because when they were selected for the XXL cover, that in 2009, they were like supposed to be that like, let's make it a well-rounded cover. So they'll be the indies. Like they were being looked at as like that they're trying to take it back to raucous or appeal to the purists. So you know what? I'm gonna give them a 5. They pulled that off.
Wow.
The intention was very clear.
That takes us to dimension 4, the song distinction versus the repetition of words and sounds. So we'll talk about the sounds first, because we've touched on this. How much variety and diversity is there in the kinds of sounds that were used on this album?
Not that much. I'll give it a 3. I think that was just okay.
You jumped right to the right answer.
Because I remember when I was listening to it, preparing for this, I was like, I just was like, okay. There were songs that I was like, okay, we can skip. And, I mean, because I was trying to make myself listen to the entire songs just for research purposes, and then it would get to a point with certain songs that I was like, okay, I get the point. The point. And I'm completely different. It's a different listening experience now for me back then, because back then I really was on that wave. Like, yo, he got next up. Like, he's dope. Like, if you looking for that real shit, that real hip hop, he got that. Like,
yeah.
Now, I don't know.
Yeah, it's there's something to, again, when you rely on vocal samples so much. If that's all you're gonna do for a song, that song should be pretty short. And I think this was still the era of 3 verse songs and ride outs. And I'm like, okay, This is a lot for just the, you know, I think the most, you know, there's some annoying sounds actually. There's I think the Is It So Provider and So Amazing, those two songs, which are like the matches for each other. They appear at similar
Simply Amazing or something.
Yeah, so and then the Show Me the Good. It's like,
and I think some of those songs were like, particularly Simply Amazing, were like positioned to kind of be singles.
Yeah.
Like you can hear which songs that they were trying to make singles, I guess.
Which is wild because it seemed like the more, we'll get to that, you felt like it got redundant.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then that takes us to like the words part of it. Blue definitely, we'll talk more about this in category 2 when we talk about his rap performance, but he definitely, there's a waxing and waning between elite lyrical performance and, you know, some of the lax, lazy kind of stuff. And with that comes repeating a lot of the same thing. So a lot of thematic stuff gets repeated, right? I don't have a car, I'm broke, and on the come up in LA, he mentions that a lot. But you have never heard another rapper more proud of his age than Blue. Blue mentions being 22. Every single, even when he's talking about his baby, his hypothetical future baby, he makes a way to mention the baby being 22, and I'm just like, holy cow. Apparently this album was recorded at different points, and that explains a lot of some of the things that chip at the cohesiveness and the variety, because it was like over a series of years, like the early 2000s.
I was about to say, it took like 5 or 6 years, something like that.
Which can explain, because maybe what we're hearing is Blue growing into his rap ability more, being a more mature writer, and I think you hear some of those disparities as the album goes. But you're definitely gonna hear the word blue a lot. You're gonna hear the age 22 dropped a lot, and you're gonna hear those themes of brokenness. Other than that, oh, and nuts. This man likes using the word nuts a lot. Again, even when he's talking about his son, he's like, it's my son. He came out of my nuts. It's like,
right.
So when you factor in the word stuff, does that change your vote from 3? No. So, okay. So, yeah, when it comes to Salt Station, Starr's giving it a 3. Something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Dimension 5. The amount of content versus the amount of songs. So when we're looking at this album, you said it's like 14 to 15 tracks. How many, what do we feel like the ratio of like topical, substantial songs are to that amount? Is it fair?
I think they overdid it. Like I'm gonna go back to, I think they could have been doing like 10.
Wow, I didn't expect that from you. When we break it down, Blue does have a fair amount of topical songs. Like we said, if we're talking about the existential themes, there's about 4 songs that go into that. There's about 2 songs specifically directed towards women, and then ones that are like in the middle. But I think, you know, on an album of that length, to have 7 songs with as a topic, that's kind of, you hope you at least get a 50-50 split. So
yeah, if
we're looking at it that way, he at least deviates from this, I represent real hip hop, y'all, to yeah. And so it's there, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. What you giving it?
I'll give it 3.5.
3.5.
That's a good way to look at it. Like the ratios, like the 7 topical, 2 for the women, 2, and then like the other 3. Yeah, I think it's longer than it should be.
Fair enough. All right, Dimension 6, the features. Now, this is always the question of, do the features help or hurt the album? There's only 3 features on this album. 4 if you count Exile himself when he raps at the end.
Right.
But you have a rapper named Rocque or Rocque, or I don't really know how it's pronounced, but he's a Detroit rapper who linked up with Blu at some point, and they made an album together under a different group name. And then around the same time, Blu also made a project with Mainframe called Johnson and Johnson. But Rocque features on this album on the song Juice and Drink. And then Aloe Blacc, back when he was rapping.
Aloe Blacc, that's who I was like, there's somebody else.
Yeah, Aloe Blacc, he does a verse on Good Life, and he's spitting. And then you also have Miguel on 3 songs. I forgot
Miguel was friends with them. Yep.
Miguel, they were part of a crew apparently called the Coochie Monsters, and again that cements how young these guys were, like that 22 mentality, right? But Miguel apparently went to high school with 2007. They're young. They're not the seasoned pros that they have come to be in the game. And
He talked about Miguel a lot, like back then, even in interviews.
Aloe Blacc included. Like he was, again, him and Exile are a little bit more veteran status by that point because they've been doing it since '95. So they had clearer execution, but you can really tell.
Aloe Blacc is that old too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And apparently Aloe Blacc is who found Blu. Blu was doing shows in the city, and he brought Exile to Blu because Exile was doing a compilation album. So what do we feel about these features?
I'm not mad at the features. I'll give it a 4. I think they, again, they were very intentional about who they selected for the album. And even though, I had never heard of Rocque, I still can't really say that I've followed his career or know anything of things that he's put out. But I think I like the feature selection because they didn't overdo it, and they chose people that felt like that they were comfortable with. Like it wasn't like, what I like is that with some of the statements that we discussed that the album was trying to make, they could have easily been like, let's try to get a Pharoah Monch on here. Let's try to. So I like that they didn't do that. I like that they went with what felt comfortable and organic, and so I'll give them a 4.
Maybe because this was an indie album, they kept it real, like within their circle. They're like, look, who can we get for the free?
That too. They definitely had to consider budget. So even at that time, a Pharoah Monch probably would have been way out of budget. So.
and there was a singer named Joseph also. I want to give them credit. And yeah, with the Miguel edition, he's only credited on the one song, the title track, but he's singing on a couple songs, First Things First and Cold Hearted. I'll say this. The feature with Rocque, you'll see Blu seem to put a little bit more effort into his verses and kind of go off. Whereas the feature with Aloe Blacc, they're even tiered. And it might have to do with the content of the song. Blu's performance is a standout on there. So something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Starr already gave her rankings. It's up to you now. Takes us to dimension 7. The question of, do the weakest song or the weakest songs bring the album down? This is make or break for a lot of albums. What's the weakest song on here, Starr?
Now that I'm thinking about it, I actually don't like Blue Collar Worker. I don't know if that's like the weakest song on there, but that's the song, I think one of the songs that they were leading with back then, or like one of the songs like that was supposed to be like a standout. Something about it, I'm just kind of like,
Does that bring the album down for you, or is it just kind of something you don't listen to?
You know what, Blue Collar, I don't like the hook. And so I don't necessarily, I won't say it's a weaker song on the album, I just don't like the hook. I've always kind of been like, the hook was just always okay to me.
So it's just preferential. It's not something that you feel is like a blemish.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a song of the songs that I would say are weaker songs. I don't necessarily think, there's songs that I could still listen to and tolerate. Like I don't feel like, oh, this song makes this project whack. I don't think the songs bring the album down. I just think they just add to the monotony, which it's different. Like, they're not bad songs, but it's just they could just go.
That's a bar. It's not that they bring it down, but they add to the monotony. It's because there's not enough. I mean, and to Exile's credit, he samples in every way soul samples could be sampled. You're getting variety in the soul sampling. It's just because they're all pulled from the same stock and they rely so much on the words. The most different song here is I Am Blue, because it's a Sesame Street sample, and Dancing in the Rain because it's going off of this like jazzy guitar, classy, from a different genre of music, basically.
Yeah.
And even the drums that he used on Dancing in the Rain, they just hit harder. It's that almost like 45 King, that where Brooklyn at, where Brook kind of drums over that contrast. We don't hear that anywhere else on the album. The rest of the beats are so choppy with the
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, weak songs are always subjective, but what we try to do is frame it in a kind of metric where you can rank how much the weak song brings the album down. So in your case, you're saying it doesn't kill it. It just doesn't do anything special. They're preferential, right? So for the purists, they might not even like the songs about women at all. You know how backpackers are.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear this girl song, right?
Yeah. And I honestly, his girl songs, I don't really think. I don't know. Like, some people are really good at it, and some people are just like, eh. That's probably the one element of the album that feels contrived, like this is for the ladies kind of thing. And it's like, everybody doesn't have to do that. There's really an art to it, and it's not here.
Man, I'm so glad you said that. It's definitely an art. So what are you giving this on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, Starr? Like how weak do the weakest songs bring the album down? If they don't bring it down much, then it's a 5. If they bring it down all the way, it's a 1.
Yeah, I don't think they bring it down much, so I'll let it rock at 5.
Okay, nice. Something for y'all to consider. Takes us to Dimension 8, Mass Appeal. Did this album have a fighting chance? Was there anything in it that you could tell they were trying to get to as wide of an audience as possible? So we were just talking about the quote-unquote girl songs, right? I think, as you mentioned in earlier Dimension, this is authentically Blue. This is what he knows. This is how he's speaking. It doesn't sound like he doesn't approach women this way. I totally believe Blue going up to women saying, I ain't got a car, but I'm an MC. Yeah. Right? I rock mics. That's besides the point, but that's my profession. Right? I imagine this is absolutely where his mindset was when it comes to women. And even on songs like The Greatest Love, where he shows that he knows what the intricacies of being in a relationship are like. I don't know if just having Miguel on the hook, who then was unknown, is enough to make the women go, oh, this is my jam.
Right. Definitely not.
Now, I mean, it might work, because, I mean, I was listening to this album and my girlfriend started singing First Things First, because she remembers when that song was out.
Okay.
It sounds like a 2007 single. First Things First. It's catchy. It has its elements, but again, it is also this raucousy feel to it. It's not what was going on in the radio at that time. This was Lil Wayne's radio back then.
Right.
You know? So
for sure.
There seems like a very intentional, I don't want to be mainstream element, despite bars on here where he's talking about blowing up and going platinum. There definitely seems like, I don't want that. He definitely didn't want that. I think in theory he wanted that. Like, it probably, because it would have been great bragging rights to be like, I'm the purest rapper that blew up. I'm the one that went platinum. Shoot, like Kanye was positioning himself that way when he first came out. Like, oh, I'm the bridge between the backpackers and the bling rap, and so. That would have been a bragging right. Like, if you were the one, right, seen as the one who could bring all these interest groups together. But yeah, overall, nah. The appeal, the mass appeal is not.
It's not there.
And back to that whole De La reference, there's a very Talib Kweli De La feeling about him. And if you look at the video that were associated with this album, so the video for Soul Provider, which you mentioned, you know, some of these being primed for singles, and it's like, why wouldn't you go with First Things First as a single? That probably had the greatest shot of getting some kind of like, you know, at least for a video and radio play, something.
And even Blue Collar Worker, even though I said I didn't like the hook, I could hear in the hook that they were trying to make that sort of that catchy, like, oh, let's put this out, because that could have probably been a single or video too.
And out of the two, First Things First sounded more organic. Like you said, Blue Collar Worker has this push to it. This the beat is a little happy. And it's not a sustainable beat for 3 verses. It's not the kind of beat you want to hear that long. Where the Miguel aspect, the softness of First Things First, it sounded more contemporary anyway. But they went with singles like Soul Provider. And in the video, Blue is literally just wearing like jeans and a white shirt with his hair like kind of undone in front of like a highway. That's the whole video. And he's showing himself like walking in the LA streets, but it looks like a very low budget video. And this is a microcosm. You can sum up the whole, you know, appeal factor of this album with that choice. It's like, oh, they really weren't trying to go any further than they went. And it doesn't help that this was pressed up under a label that folded right after. They only pressed up 3,500 copies, which in the long run had an effect of making this album popular, but in the short run, as a business decision, it's one of those V8 moments. Like, but apparently that was like some kind of error, and it made it legendary. But it was very contained in this idea of we're underground, we're staying true, and we're gonna appeal to the people who are seeking that true hip hop.
Exactly. It was very esoteric still. Like if you know, you know.
Yeah, and that's how this album was found too. So that we'll talk about that in the next dimension. But something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. What you giving this for mass appeal?
Yeah, I'll give it a 2, and that's just being nice, because it was really more like a word of mouth type of situation.
All right, dimension 9, my favorite, the 3 I's: impact, innovation, influence. And so, Starr, you were there when Blue wound up being on the cover of the XXL freshman class. You were working at Double XL at the time. Can you speak a little to that selection process? How you even got to that point? Well, that was 2009, right? That was 2 years after
that was 2009, 2 years after the album came out. And so that whole, I mean, as everyone has probably figured, like that process is pretty much a sham.
This was the cover with Mickey Fax, Asher Roth, B.O.B.
B.O.B. Oh God.
Right.
And we loved B.O.B. back then. I'll tell you that much. We did really like B.O.B. Currency was Lil Wayne's artist. And if you know your hip hop magazine history, you know back then Lil Wayne ran Double XL. Like he was always on the cover. He was like the cover superstar because he always pulled numbers. People just loved Lil Wayne like that. So Currency being a Lil Wayne artist. And so I'm gonna use that to segue into it was a mix of how people got chosen. There was definitely like the editor-in-chief had their favorites, and like these are the people that we're choosing just because this is who is going on because I said so, or because I'm cool with somebody at the label, or like in the Currency situation, he's Lil Wayne's artist, and this is the person that Lil Wayne says is next. So it really was a mix of who got selected for what, and then like the crumb slots were like that was where you had the diversity hires, right?
Like Charles Hamilton, Asher Roth, Corey Guns.
Exactly, like, you know, we need to add diversity kind of, and but I will say there were people at Double XL who really did like Blue. Shoot, I liked Blue. I did at that, you know, when I got introduced to his album, I was like, oh no, he's good, he's talented. You know, I was one of the people like kind of into representation for the purists. And so that's really how Blue ended up getting on. Like, people liked him. We did like him. We did understand the things that we you and I just talked about his album and appeal. But we were like, this is something that people still need to be exposed to know that the element is still here if they want it. It's not dead. And we're still thinking about this segment of hip hop fans. And so that's how he ended up on.
And even in that experience, you said he was kind of standoffish.
Oh yeah, he was very quiet. It was almost like, I don't know if it was imposter syndrome. I don't know if he ever talked about this, but it seemed like that could be what it was. It's either that or just some people don't do well around a lot of people. Like, it was a lot of people, a lot of big personalities. There was a lot going on. It's a photo shoot. They had stylists, people doing makeup, and then all of us from the magazines, like, we're going around interviewing them for like snippets for the web. Like, it was a lot going on. And so yeah, he was very quiet. Like, and it wasn't necessarily just like, it didn't feel like just a general shy kind of quiet, or like a general let me watch the situation first kind of quiet, because I understand that. It really felt more like a WTF. Like, what is it? Like, it seemed like an existential crisis. That's what I picked up from it. Like what am I doing here kind of thing. And that just made him retreat into himself.
If you look up all the articles that have been written since this album and about this album, they all kind of point at the same idea, that Blue ran from his own fame and didn't want to go any further than where he went. And his work ethic doesn't show that, because Blue has created consistent albums for, throughout these past decades. But as far as anything that shoots towards attaining a higher spot in the hip hop pantheon, or even, even
that's the stuff that comes with fame and climbing, right? Like, some people just aren't mixy people, and he probably just works better when he creates an environment that he can control. But the other elements that kind of lead you to climbing is just stuff that he probably just didn't mess with that. The
mythology surrounding this album is because there were so few copies pressed up, it ran out quickly. And once the word of mouth spread, it can only be found through like illegal digital downloads. This is back in the BitTorrent era. And as we mentioned when we were talking about Starr's illustrious career with the GangStarrGirl blog, this was smack dab in the middle of the blog revolution. He single-handedly credits the blog Now Right for putting Below the Heavens on people's radar. And then, of course, from there, you got Two Dope Boys and all of the other popular...
And f.k.a was at XXL during that time.
That makes sense. And, this became one of those albums that the journalists were buzzing about, that then made it available to the public. And we're talking about a hell of an era. This is the beginning of the West Coast revolution of spitters. There's this vacuum that it existed until The Game came out with California, where people were like, California rap is dead on a popular level. The Game came, reinvigorated it, but then there was this other wave of lyrical artists, not to say that The Game is not lyrical, but people who are purely considered lyricists, like Aomari, Fashion. We started to see Kendrick Lamar in the TDE camp come up, and Blue was a part of this wave. He was kind of like leading the pack, honestly, at that point, because Kendrick's name was K-Dot was still bubbling under the radar. So Blue was leading, and people were looking at Blue as the head of the revolution. So this became this word of mouth, highly sought out album that you could find on the blogs, and then it got released for digital streaming when we got into the streaming era. And I missed that wave. I was in the grind as a rapper at that time, so I wasn't thinking about listening to other rappers' projects. None of those people on the cover did I wind up listening to until like years after, because I saw them as competition. I think I was rooting for Corey Guns, but
I was rooting for Corey Guns too. That's a whole nother story.
That's a whole nother story. But yeah, when we talk about impact, this album was very impactful because of that kind of stop and start effect of its release, the word of mouth, the inner circle of journalists who spread this and the rise of the blogs.
And that's rare, I gotta say. Even then, like the type of buzz that Blu Exile had just from the word of mouth of journalists, that's rare.
It is. That it was the ultimate cosign.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about an era where blogs did not like co-signing rappers because they were getting bombarded all the time. I was one of them. I was like, yo, you gonna post my album, right? But we also saw a lot of rappers doing this. I'm bringing hip-hop back because this was also the era of hip-hop is dead. That was the ongoing...
If we only knew then what we know now, oh boy.
Yeah, right. The two prominent conversations of the day was hip hop is dead and New York rap in particular is dead. So I mean, there was the struggle. Nas did a whole album, and so that has to be factored in. Do we hear any innovation on this album?
Not really.
Okay. And then the influence of this album, you'll hear a lot of rappers who came after this reference this album as a complete classic. It completely embodies the mind of a young man at that time. It completely embodies the mind of an MC. And so a lot of people related to it, and they feel like it's a very special gem to them, because I think for a lot of people they put the nostalgia element. This channel is all about.
You know, Anselm, I'm saying my husband Anselm feels that way. Yeah. he came upstairs and was like, you slandering my favorite album. he's that album was a complete classic. Like, it spoke to guys like him.
Shout out to Anselm. Anselm will be on the show soon.
And for people that don't know, he was at Double XL at that time. We were not together then, but he was at Double XL at that time, and definitely was instrumental in spreading the gospel of, like, him and f.k.a, like spreading the gospel of Blu and Exile.
Yeah, so he was a part of this this word of mouth circulation. Yeah, that's amazing. The influence is there, and you know, this channel is about separating the nostalgia from the fact or from the actual work itself, and I know that's going to be hard for a lot of people. So if you hear anything less than this is a complete classic, for a lot of people, they're like, what do you mean? And especially if you were in that age bracket at the time. On the Drink Champs episode, Mickey Fax makes it a point to, like, give Blu his flowers in his face, and him and Asher Roth tell Blu how important this album was to hip-hop, the hip-hop landscape at the time, and hip-hop in general. And so I think the influence is going to be from a personal space where people have reverence for this album, and maybe down the line you'll hear, maybe you've heard some of the underground rappers give credit to this album for influencing their style. I don't know if there's any blatant influence that came after this.
Like, in hindsight, because Blu didn't get to talk about his album during that XXL interview. He had opportunities to talk, he just didn't. And yeah, I think there's so much more that could have been explored about the album then that's being explored now. Yeah. So. Yeah,
it becomes what's media darling, a critical darling, but not something that had this, but something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5. Heartbeats, what are you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5 for impact, innovation, and influence?
Impact, I can see the impact. I'll give it a 4. I don't think necessarily it was innovative, because it's one of those hindsight type things. Like, I'll give it a 4.
Yeah. All right. Takes us to the final dimension 10, the overall timelessness and uniqueness of this album. Is this a timeless album?
No. It's not timeless. I'll say it's unique. It's unique, but it's not timeless. If you hear it, it's definitely going to sound like it is from... Shoot, it doesn't even sound like it's from 2007, really. So it's not timeless. It definitely sounds more like late 90s. And that's what they were going for, I'm sure. Yeah.
Now, uniqueness, you already brought out that it's unique because at the time, people weren't doing this, so it stood out. Is it still unique now?
You could say it's still unique now.
Right.
It's like insecure, but in musical form for men, right?
Yeah, it's like boastful, insecure. It's vulnerable, it's lazy and it's high lyricism at the same time. It's derivative, but it's authentic. It's reminiscent, but it's also young. It's era specific, but it's a callback and it has cheat code elements to it. And so because of that, because of the depth of the existentialism on this album, you factor all of those together, and that makes it pretty unique. Timelessness is, more of a variable, but this is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Starr, take us home. What you giving this on that dimension?
I'll give it a 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mic drop. All right, y'all. Want to thank my special guest for this very special Category 1 breakdown of this classic turning 15. And we're talking about Blu and Exile's Below the Heavens. Join us for Category 2, where we go over the rap performance on the album. In the meantime, y'all know what it is. F a Rap Critic. We talk about it while I live it. Word to meth.
Nice.